Greetings and salutations, fellow book readers. This is Mark, and the book I will review today is Frankenstein. Before we continue, this is personalized limited edition of the Frankenstein with leather cover designed and made by me. At the end of the video, I will tell you a couple of ways of how you can get one for yourself if you are interested. Now let's get back to the review. Frankenstein, or the Modern Prometheus, is a novel written by English writer Mary Shelley and published in 1818 when she was only 20 years old. Frankenstein was Shelley's first and most successful work, arguably considered the first science fiction novel. It is believed the book was a product of the competition between Lord Byron and herself to write the best horror story. Frankenstein seems to be inspired by Shelley's travels, including Geneva and the trip along the River Rhine, with the visit to the Frankenstein castle, where it was believed that some anatomical experiments were performed a couple of centuries before. It surprises me the level of the novel's psychological maturity created by somebody so young, but then it seems people matured much faster in the old days. What is Frankenstein about? On the surface, the book is about an individual playing God and a quest for eternal life that goes wrong. The deeper message of the novel is portrayed through a psychological journey about the impact of experiences on our beliefs and behavior. It is about a sleeping monster inside each one of us that can be woken up by the treatment we receive from others. There is love in me, the likes of which you have never seen. There is rage in me, the likes of which should never escape. If I am not satisfied in the one, I will indulge in the other. The book's meaning or message is a bit different from the connotation the word Frankenstein has in the modern culture, where Frankenstein is an insane monster running amok and killing people. A bit of the plot. The tale of Frankenstein has been retold in films countless number of times, but never correctly. At least I have not seen it. In the book, the story takes place in the late 18th century and is told in a series of letters between the captain of a ship stuck in ice in the Arctic Ocean and his sister back in England. The crew rescues a nearly frozen man traveling in the sled over the ice. The man is Victor Frankenstein, and when he recovers some strength, he shares the story of his life with the captain. He begins with his birth in Italy to a wealthy family from Geneva and describes his childhood, which he spent mostly studying and acquiring knowledge because of his obsessive need to know and understand the world. The world was to me a secret which I desired to devise. Also, during this time, his parents adopt an orphan from a noble family named Elizabeth. Before Frankenstein leaves for the university, his mother dies, and this tragedy spurs in him an obsessive need to challenge death. In the university in Germany, he starts to experiment with bringing back to life dead organisms and eventually creates his humanoid, but he is disappointed and disgusted with his result. He aimed to create something beautiful, but instead the creature is monstrous and visually repugnant. So he abandons the finished project in horror, and the monster seizes the opportunity and runs away. After months of sickness caused by his work, Frankenstein decides to go back home to Geneva. Before the departure, he receives a letter from Elizabeth about the tragedy in the family. Frankenstein is convinced the monster he created is responsible, but another person, innocent, is found guilty and punished. Frankenstein decides to find the culprit and destroy him, and eventually the two meet. The monster retells to him his adventures since he left the laboratory and makes a request, but Frankenstein refuses it. And for the rest of the tale told to the captain, Frankenstein describes the tragic and bloody consequences caused by his rejection of the monster. After Frankenstein ends his story, the ship's captain needs to make a critical decision. On one hand, he is being pressured by Frankenstein to follow and destroy the monster, and on the other, his crew demands they head back home to England. The captain's dilemma is to follow his dreams and ambitions and risk the lives of other people, or put the safety of the man he is responsible for over his own personal and somewhat egoistical wants. Basically, to be or not to be Frankenstein. And that's the basic plot. What do I think about Frankenstein? The book is somewhat of a surprise based on the general notion people have of Frankenstein and not what most readers expect. The novel is more of a human drama than a horror, even somewhat of a Greek tragedy, thus the modern Prometheus subtitle. The culprit for all this confusion is the modern media, which took a beautiful, deep, and human story and perverted it into the superficial, two-dimensional, and plastic horror that today's interpretation of Frankenstein are. In the novel, Frankenstein is not the monster, but the creator, Dr. Victor Frankenstein. Monster doesn't have a name, perhaps to keep him connected by an imaginary umbilical cord to his birth giver and make him more of an inner monster instead of a detached entity by naming him. So the two are inseparable and one exists because of and is projection of the other, probably similar to Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Victor Frankenstein is an example of disastrous effects when ambition is larger than talent and left uncontrolled to do its damage. Scientific arrogance in challenging the nature for the satisfaction of the individual ego without much regard for the possible negative consequences for the others. Frankenstein can be considered somewhat of a mythological anti-hero, as is implied in the subtitle Modern Prometheus, an individual challenging the god and his will and thinking he can outdo the master. Probably comparing him with Prometheus is more of Frankenstein's self-image and self-labeling, since his experiment, unlike the Greek myth, is a selfish effort that carries conceivable disastrous consequences for the humanity without any visible benefit. Frankenstein is trying to improve what doesn't need improvement by playing God, and this is his greatest crime. And every crime needs to be punished, and so he's punished in a somewhat poetic way through his creation, the monster. The monster is not some strange exterior entity, but a creation and part of humanity, a symbolic child and a symbol of the individual's growth and development from birth to adulthood. There is somewhat of a child-parent relationship between him and Frankenstein, to whom he refers as father throughout the book. After creating or giving a symbolic birth to the monster, Frankenstein goes through a type of postpartum depression, and as a result of it, he abandons his child. Later, because of his appearance, the monster is also rejected by all the people who see him. But he makes a human-like effort to reconcile with his father and wants Frankenstein to make his existence easier and happier as any child would expect it from his parent. If I see but one smile on your lips when we meet, occasioned by this or any other exertion of mine, I shall need no other happiness. Unfortunately, his pleas are refused, so this further rejection, combined with the general exclusion from the humanity, creates a psychologically damaged being, which turns to hate and fury as a manner of dealing with people, and he wants revenge for all the suffering he experienced. People see him as a monster and maybe even want him to be a monster, so he becomes a monster and declares a war against the whole species. Perhaps the monster could be called a psychopath, but I think he is too emotional and sensitive to fit the label. Rather, he is the creation and the result of the society and their actions. He wanted to be valued for who he was and not for what he looked like, inner versus outer beauty, but people disappointed him with their superficiality. Even his symbolic father couldn't see through his physical appearance and rejected him. So the story is more about humanity and its behavior than the monster. There also are some biblical influences on how the monster is portrayed. He finds Milton's Paradise Lost, reads it, and identifies with the plight of Lucifer. Further, the rejection of monster's wish by Frankenstein can be compared to Adam's expulsion from the paradise by the creator for sinning, and the rage he has against his creator, Frankenstein, is comparable to the anger some individuals feel against God. Accursed creator, why did you form a monster so hideous that even you turned from me in disgust? God, in pity, made man beautiful and alluring, after his own image, but my form is filthy type of yours, more horrid even from the very resemblance. Satan had his companions, fellow devils, to admire and encourage him, but I am solitary and abhorred. Another character that has influence over Frankenstein is Elizabeth, his adopted sister, who is symbolically given to him by his mother as a type of gift to protect and cherish, and also to teach him to value and make sacrifices for the people closest to us. Further, the mother shows him how to care for people by making the ultimate sacrifice for Elizabeth, which he doesn't understand at the time. Elizabeth also seems to be there to try and save Frankenstein from nobody but himself. She represents a lifeboat always floating close by that he can climb into, but he doesn't see it or think he doesn't need it until it is too late. Robert Walton, the ship's captain, might be seen as a symbol of an ambitious and obsessive man and a possible candidate to become the next Frankenstein. The short exchange between him and Frankenstein is marked by instant rapport, and it might be seen a bit as pupil and master relationship. Frankenstein sees in Walton a keen spirit with similar passions that destroyed his own life, and full of personal aspiration with little consideration for the consequences his actions might have on others. And he tells him his life story as a warning of possible ramification if one doesn't control his desires. Frankenstein warns Walton that obsessive pursuit of ambitions and knowledge has contributed to many historical tragedies, such as slavery and discovery of America, which destroyed ancient civilizations in Mexico and Peru. Perhaps it is not an accident Shelley chose those two examples, since the 18th century was marked by the beginning of self-critical look at ourselves as the part of the Western society, and also there was the call for and emerging of the individual human rights. Even the monster wants to be identified as a person and demands his basic human right to happiness and well-being. The impact of Shelley's own life on the story cannot be ignored. Shortly before writing the novel, there was the death of her daughter, which she must have felt was unfair and probably had strong feelings about God's will and wished she could rectify it. And in addition, there likely was a personal responsibility she felt for the death of others. Firstly, her own mother died from the complications caused by her birth, and later the suicide of her lover's wife, which she must have felt was caused by her affair with him. Also, I think the dark, somber, and cold mood of the story was further influenced by geological event on the other side of the planet. In 1815, Mount Tambora in Indonesia exploded in what is considered the largest volcanic eruption in the recorded history, and it had significant impact on the world weather. The year Shelley was writing her novel was called in Europe The Year Without Summer, since the summer was cold, dark and snowy, crops failed, and there was a widespread famine. And the weather is a great influence on our moods, so the subject and setting of the story should be no surprise. To sum it up, Frankenstein is a beautifully written classic novel that carries a moral message and a warning about the destructive power of uncontrolled ambition and our arrogance to try to control the nature, which is timeless and maybe even more relevant today than back then. The modern science and technology has given us some means and tools, or at least some illusion of it, to challenge the nature and natural order and play God, but I have a feeling our arrogant wings will be clipped before we get too close to the sun. We are quick to declare wars against nature, against climate change, against coronavirus, etc., 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 but these probably are wars we cannot win, and in the long run they will create more damage than solutions. Perhaps we have upset the natural balance by uncontrolled procreation, and nature simply wants to restore the equilibrium by getting rid of some of us. In nature, nothing wins, only adapts, and that's how it prolongs its existence. But we are too arrogant to see it. I remember a stand-up comedy routine by the late George Carlin when he said that in our collective arrogance we think that the planet needs saving, and we are the ones that can do it. He says, the earth went through a lot worse than us, and it will shake us off like a wet dog shaking off a bunch of irritating fleas. The planet will be fine, but we are fucked. Maybe I went a bit off-road, but it is to show you that reading is an act of individual interpretation, and Frankenstein is a great novel that is surprisingly stimulating and leads to quite a few reflections about the society and ourselves. Also, it amazes me that a girl in her late teens could produce such, maybe not complex, but symbolic and insightful tale. Heavy misfortunes have befallen us, but let us only cling closer to what remains and transfer our love for those whom we have lost to those who yet live. Our circle will be small, but bound close by the ties of affection and mutual misfortune. And when time shall have softened your despair, new and dear objects of care will be born to replace those of whom we have been so cruelly deprived. Okay, let's talk about the physical book. The book I am holding is a paperback which I transformed into hardcover leather-bound edition. To make the cover, I use grade A, naturally tan hide I buy from a tannery in North Spain. It is the same leather Louis Vuitton uses to make his bags, so it is top quality. I do all the processing of the leather myself. First, I designed the cover, and what I did here, I took this painting of dead human head with variety of medical gadgets impaling it, and to me it shows that the effort of going against natural course is futile, and all the science can do is confirm what nature decides. This is the back of with the blurb, and inside front cover I printed a quote from the book. If you want to see a more detailed video where I explain how I transform paperback into leather hardcover, click on the link in the description. I will make a maximum of 100 editions of each title. Each one will be numbered and initialed, and the numbers will go in chronological order from 2 up, since number 1 stays with me. The price will be around $100, so if you would like me to make one for you, you can click below on my email and send me a message. I do not guarantee I will do it, since it will depend on the time I have available, access to leather, and if I can get my hands on the copy of the book. Now, if you're not willing to spend the $100 but you still want the book, what you can do is click below on the PayPal link and donate $3 or more to my channel, and for every 100 donations I will make a lottery and draw one name, and the winner will receive the book. So if you are cheap but feel lucky, this might be the way to do it. Also, your donations give me the extra motivation to make the book reviews, and I appreciate them very much, so thank you in advance. One more thing, when you make your donation, remember to include the title of the book you would like to win. The book itself is beautiful. Visually, it has a very nice texture. It smells great. And the more you handle it, the more beautiful it will become. And it makes a great gift for yourself or somebody who appreciates books. So, if you want one, don't snooze or you might lose. Well, that's it. So, let's end it here. And until next time, keep your ear close to the ground and read a book. Adios.